On July 2nd, Ghislaine Maxwell, ex-girlfriend and business partner to Jeffrey Epstein, was arrested in New Hampshire. She has been called his alleged accomplice, associate, business partner, and friend, yet is she a sex trafficker? Here today is survivor advocate Snezana Vukovic and director of training at Unitas, Tonya Turner, to explore this timely question. Maxwell is charged with a conspiracy to entice a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. The indictment includes that Maxwell assisted, facilitated, and contributed to Jeffrey Epstein's abuse of minor girls by, among other things, helping Epstein to recruit, groom, and ultimately abuse victims known to Maxwell and Epstein to be under the age of 18. The opposite of cowardice is bravery, and that is what Epstein's survivors have shown during this process as they have fought to hold their abusers accountable. I can't help but see the braces in this photo of then 16-year-old Michelle Akeda and wonder how anyone who assaulted her could have thought she was a willing adult. I have worked with more than 1,500 survivors of sex trafficking. Every single one deserved justice, but few have received it. The same is true for the dozens of young girls allegedly abused and exploited by Jeffrey Epstein and his network. Maxwell and Epstein both would use elements of force, fraud, and coercion to control their victims. The indictment read victims were told Epstein would pay for their travel, education, or careers. Once they were indebted to him, he would have them further under his control. Debt bondage is also an element of human trafficking. Maxwell herself is accused by survivors who were as young as 14 of giving them to older wealthy businessmen who would then rape them. Looking at the photos of these victims, some in braces at the time they were being exploited and assaulted, it is hard to believe anyone would think they were consenting adults. Sex trafficking is the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act, in which the commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such an act has not attained 18 years of age. Hi everyone, this is Andrea Powell with Corona Rising Surviving Now, episode 10, is Ghislaine Maxwell a sex trafficker? So as we always start with our show, I want to let you know that Corona Rising is a survivor-led organization empowering survivors of human trafficking and gender-based violence to reach their fullest potential as leaders in their own lives and in their communities. Today we have two amazing guests. We have Tonya Turner, who is the Director of Training and Education at Unitas, an organization that I'm also affiliated at, in full disclosure. And I also am having here Snezana Vukovic, who is an advocate with Corona Rising based in Belgrade, Serbia, and also a longtime friend. So I'm very happy and feel very lucky to have them here today on what is really an important conversation. Obviously, many of the topics that we discuss here at Surviving Now is not necessarily always related to trafficking, but today, more than ever, really, I felt it was very important that we have a much more detailed conversation about what is sex trafficking. And the reason for that is it's important for us to understand that, to understand if people like Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell are traffickers, how do they exist so freely and out in the open? Because these were not clandestine, hotel closet rooms, dungeons or basements in country houses. This was out there in the open. Ghislaine Maxwell, for example, was so out there in the open that there are photographs of her sitting in the Queen's chair in Buckingham Palace. So I don't know how more present you can get than that. So let's just start with a little bit of background. On July 2nd, Ghislaine Maxwell, the ex-girlfriend and business partner to Jeffrey Epstein, was arrested in New Hampshire. That's right. After 8 months of searching for her, the FBI found her in New Hampshire. Not Sri Lanka, not the Philippines. She has been called his alleged accomplice, his associate, his business partner, his ex-girlfriend. But I have yet to see anyone ask the big question, is she also a sex trafficker? Here today we have Snezana Vukovic again and Tonya Turner. And Maxwell is actually charged specifically with the conspiracy to entice a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. You can actually find the indictment online, all 14 pages. The indictment includes that Maxwell assisted, facilitated, and contributed to Jeffrey Epstein's abuse of minor girls, among other things, by helping Epstein groom, recruit, and ultimately abuse victims known to Epstein and Maxwell who were under the age of 18. I want to note for the purposes of the show, not necessarily the case, that there also were young women who were over the age of 18 and their abuse and exploitation is just as real. But in talking about sex trafficking, I wanted to pause and actually read for the listeners the legal definition as passed in the year 2000 of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. So bear with me, it's a lot of words, but we're going to break it down. Sex trafficking is defined as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act. In your mind, circle that word commercial, in which the commercial sex act was induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or that person was under the age of 18. So what does that mean exactly? It means if you're under the age of 18, you don't have to prove that someone forced you, tricked you, threatened you. The fact that you're engaged in commercial sex, that someone is doing that to you, means that you're a victim of trafficking. For a separate show, maybe we'll talk about how that doesn't necessarily mean you're not arrested, but I'm going to put that down for now and keep going. But just think of the fact that sex trafficking is like a triangle of evil, if you will. So you have the trafficker at the top, you have the victim here, and then you have the buyer. That's sex trafficking. And so you have to have all three components for there really to be this serial rape for profit, which is what sex trafficking is. So I'm going to pause here, and I wanted to ask Tonya, what are the most common tactics that you've seen traffickers use to lure victims in your work?
Thank you, Andrea. First, let me just share that I'm really happy to be here today and just sharing this extremely important conversation that we're having today. And when we're talking about sex traffickers, when we're talking about this, what they do, I refer to them as really being the apex of manipulators. And I often think about, and I'm going to read, this is a quote that I often think about, and I've always used in this work. And this was a quote from a pimp from 2009, and his name was Andrea Thurman. He said, "My job is to make sure she has what she needs, personal hygiene, get her nails done, take her to buy an outfit, take her out to eat, make her feel wanted, but I keep the money," right? And when I think about traffickers and I think about pimps, I think about the fact that they are manipulators and coerce. But the key thing is that they become what the victim needs. They've identified exactly what that vulnerability and or vulnerabilities are, and they become the source for what to fill that vulnerability. And that can come in so many different shapes and forms. For some, it could be housing. For some, it could just be wanting to be loved. For some, you have traffickers who will say, pimps who will become your loved one. I love you, baby. I'm the one that will only love you and have always loved you. You want a baby? I'll be your baby. I'll be the father. I'll be the father you never had. So whatever that vulnerability is that they find, they become it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, one of the things that really struck me in one of the news articles, it was the New York Times article that we were looking at, talking about Ghislaine Maxwell taking these young girls who were very vulnerable, shopping, creating like a mother or a sister kind of atmosphere, and how to build that trust. Because the way that some of the articles read bothered me, because it made it seem as if these girls were just like gullible because they went shopping and suddenly, they owe Maxwell and Epstein, but the article then doesn't get into the reason those tactics were effective. And so, Snezana, I mean, you've been, an advocate for a long time. You yourself are a survivor. You have really come to understand not only the tactics of traffickers, but like what are the things that you've seen that traffickers have done to lure vulnerable youth, and why do they target vulnerable youth?
Personally, for me, it was a bad experience because, as you know, I didn't have housing, I didn't have family. So most of them that they lured me, it's like they were a figure of father, a figure of mother, and two kids. Because, as you know, I love kids. And in Stratishte, where you met me, there's a lot of kids who need help. And I wanted to do something that no one did for me, like escort them to their house or something. And I finished always kidnapped or molested or forced into sexual activities. And they just use every single bit of your weakness, because in the orphanages, especially in Belgrade, they diminish every single self-respect that you have in yourself. They kill everything that is good in you, and they just exploit you in every single way. That's what in Serbia they do. If they see a weak child, they will fed him, and after that, that child will be hungry for years and never full with its stomach, but it has to repay them every single piece of bread that children or a girl had. So it's a really big problem that even here in Serbia, nobody wants to talk about. Everybody is turning heads away.
Yeah, and I think Snezana, it's interesting, having your perspective from state orphanages in Serbia, because it's as awful as it is. Unfortunately, there's a lot of similarities with what you see in foster care and state institutions here in the United States. People often don't want to look in their own, backyard, if you will. And I think that's really important. Tonya, in your experience, what was, and I know everyone's different and unique, but what was a typical vulnerable girl like in your programs? What was her background before she was in a trafficking situation?
Most of the young ladies that I worked with were primarily Black and brown girls. And their experiences were, especially when we're looking at grooming, right? That grooming aspect was really familial. And unfortunately, it was an uncle, or it was an aunt. It was someone who needed something from these girls and boys. But the heinousness of the grooming aspect of it is that it mimicked a real relationship, right? It mimicked the aspect of what you thought a mom, or what you thought a dad, or what you thought a family was supposed to be, someone to protect you and to love you and to take care of you. And it all turned on them when suddenly that grooming became, okay, now you owe me, you know what, right? And that's the unfortunate thing. That's the heinousness of what's going on in our country. And the heinousness, yes, it's the familial because it's within the family. But the other aspect was these men who became that boyfriend, that these girls wanted, or these boys wanted. They became the love entrance. And I always tell everyone, when you're young, and before you go and judge what these young people are going through, remember your first love. Remember the chemical things that were going on. And oh my God, your mom and dad may have said, if you had that kind of relationship, you can't see that person because they're not good for you. No. You climb out the windows, you meet them in places that, you weren't supposed to be. That is the surge at that, when we're talking about youth specifically, that is the surge of that combination of wanting to be wanted, wanting to be loved. And also, you have this younger, older guy who quite frankly is promising what everyone else isn't promising. That's the heinousness of how traffickers operate.
Well, and I think that's important to note, is you're preying upon that vulnerability, but you're also creating this almost like Romeo Juliet sort of scenario where there's a little bit of that secrecy, and thinking about Ghislaine Maxwell. So she she engaged in that grooming that you're talking about. She was that entry point for many of these young girls. She would find a girl who wanted to go to school or wanted to become a model or wanted to become loved, basically. And many of these girls suffered already prior to meeting her. So she would use that. And then, and this is where I think it's very interesting to think about her role as a woman. And then I'm going to ask Snezana a quick question about this. But as a woman, she was able to get that trust in a different way in that grooming and recruitment process. And Snezana, I wanted to ask you, why do you think using a woman to get these girls was such a clever tactic from Epstein?
Because woman knows what woman wants. Who will better know what do you want and what's making you feeling comfortable in your comfort zone? What's tickling your mind? What's moving you forward than a woman? Especially if that woman is a little bit sneaky and a big psychologist.
Right, exactly, and understanding and honing in on those tactics, because again, thinking about the definition of trafficking, it's that recruitment, harboring, obtaining, and those are the things that Maxwell did then to deliver these girls to Epstein, telling them that he could help fulfill all their dreams, that he was a benefactor. And there's numerous photos of him with these very young girls playing this kind of father role with them, like taking them out, in a boat or on a plane, or, and it looks like this family dynamic. It really does. You see these photos, it's like he's their uncle, but in reality, then he in turn got favor by pushing them out onto his wealthy friends. And Tonya, I'm going to ask kind of what I think is one of the hardest questions, but I think it's important. It's like, again, these young girls were not hidden. This was not a secret club, if you will. I mean, there was some secrecy, but a lot of very well-known men are connected to Epstein and were at these parties. If not participating, they were at least there. What do you think that says about our culture, Tonya, that this was happening so out in the open?
Yeah, this is it's a hard one, but Andrea, quite frankly, in our country, in the United States of America, the moral compass is directly equated with power and wealth. And what does that mean? That means that for these people that have that level of wealth and power, there are no perceived consequences. And because of the systemic ways our country is built, they have been protected. They know that they can go and have a level of secrecy, because on these boats, there's no, you can't see what's going on. All you know is that something is going on that you can't put your finger on. These people know that there's a intertwining of power. I mean, think about it. Epstein, who got him for the plea bargain?
Right.
The plea bargain alone, okay, that was the first process of understanding the depth and width of the problem that we have politically in our country. And when you're looking at what's going on right now, with his girlfriend and Maxwell, right? With her, she's looking for a plea bargain as well. So the problem we're going to have in our country is, if in fact she is able to get that plea bargain, and that plea bargain is primarily based on quote unquote what the streets call receipts, which are actually the photographs and videos and so on and so forth. How are we going to balance out her involvement? Because she's not the first one that has been involved as a woman, as a trafficker. She's not the first. When you're looking at the actress, in Rainier's case, she got off. And the question is, in this work, when you look at the majority, I think the number that came out was 38% of women that are actually traffickers as well. The challenge we have is identifying those folks that have also been victims. And this is what's happening in this case right now, where she is concerned. They're saying, well, you know, it was his girlfriend. She was probably a victim too. So what are we going to do to protect her?
Right.
And that's the challenge. That's the challenge that's going on with this case right now.
And I agree with you. And I have to be honest, that, you know, when I first started reading about her involvement, my first instinct was I looked at everything I could to see if I could talk myself into believing that she had been victimized as well. Because, you know, as someone who knows, you and I both know, and Snezana, you know as well, that traffickers will use one of their victims to do their dirty work. They will
Right.
make that girl feel like she's the most special one. She is above the rest, and then she will take the fall for him if the police get involved. She's the one who handled the money. She's the one who drove the girls around. She's the one who set up the assaults, the dates, if you will. I refer to them as assaults because that's what they are. And so you have this whole dynamic where what people unfortunately call the bottom, the main girl, takes the fall. So when I started to think about this story in the last few years, I thought, okay, she's got to be a bottom. She's got to be a bottom. And then she just wasn't. So, and in some ways it doesn't even matter, because you can have sympathy for someone who's been through something, and maybe she probably went through a lot of spending time with Jeffrey Epstein, but that doesn't mean that you get a pass.
Exactly.
And I hope that justice is really done for these survivors, and she is as accountable as anyone else. Snezana, you've read now quite a bit in the last 24 hours about Ghislaine Maxwell and about the wealthy men who were involved in this case. Kind of putting the wealth and the money and the fame aside, what do you think is in our culture that allows people to look the other way when they see these young girls being exploited? Oh, Snezana? Oh, okay. Well, we'll keep rocking and rolling and circle back. But I started to break down all of the actions that we've read about, all of the allegations that are alleged against Maxwell, to see how many of the words in the definition of trafficking I could circle that fit what she did, and
Right.
I circled most of them.
Right. And with that, Andrea, the bottom line is we have a third party that's involved.
Right.
We have an exchange. We have a profit, right? And that is we have coercion. We have the exchange. We have a third party that is actually profiting. So, my question is, I think that's sex trafficking, don't you?
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the thing. And we're sitting here on the show. All of us know that you don't have to prove force, fraud, and coercion if you're a minor. But just for our own sake, we went ahead and did it anyway. And so it's and so just wanted to cross all the T's and dot the I's on this one. And so I feel like, if this were a coffin, it would be nailed shut by now. And Snezana, welcome back.
I'm sorry, my phone broke.
Oh, no worries. Snezana, I wanted to ask you, what do you think, because you're in Serbia, so you're pretty far away from us here in the US, but what do you think about the culture there allows for trafficking to happen as openly as it does in Serbia? Because I've spent a lot of time in Belgrade, and I have to say that the times that I've been there, trafficking was happening pretty much out in the open. If you knew
it's much worse now. It's
Yeah.
much worse. Now it's open. Now it's totally open. I know a couple of girls who are having girls who work for them. And I know policemen who get paid to just keep their mouth shut.
And I think that's important to point out, like the policemen who are looking the other way, in this case, there's an element of that, political will to look the other way. Why do you think the police look the other way from
money? Big money.
Yeah, absolutely. They're partakers.
And no regrets, no heart at all. It's not my child. Why do I care? But it can be your child. and you can't be next, and you don't even know. You're not aware of the situation. You're not aware that what you do, karma will hit you right back in your face.
Well, and I think it's important to point out that, you know, these people who look the other way, the police, the politicians, I consider them kind of the fourth face of this exploitation. You know, we have the buyers, we have the traffickers, we have the survivors, and we have these people, the bystanders, who are quite political and quite, in some cases, quite powerful. So you have all of this. And one thing we haven't really talked about yet is the fact that we had, you know, Ghislaine Maxwell hiding in New Hampshire. We have Jeffrey Epstein, who ultimately hid and ran, but then killed himself. I know there's some controversy around that, but we're not going to get into that right now. And then we have men like Prince Andrew and other wealthy men who are, you know, deflecting blame, saying they weren't involved or they were just on the airplane. Basically, everybody's running and hiding, and the people who are standing the tallest, who are standing the most true and consistent and brave in the face of their own injustice, is the survivors themselves. And so I'm going to ask both of you this question, but Tonya, from your perspective, because you've worked with so many survivors as I have, what do you think justice should look like for them at this point, in this case?
That's a loaded question, because with the climate of our country, I believe the outcome is not just for survivors. The outcome is for survivors. The outcome is for women. The outcome is for anyone in this country that is being abused. The outcome is the dismantling of the systems that keep these people protected. So for the victims themselves of Maxwell, they personally have to decide what is going to fulfill them. But this is much greater because of the fact that the outcome of this case can actually determine what's going to happen in so many other cases that will come up. Why? Because we have a system of men and women that have been protected. So we have to look at the legislation. We have to look at the fact that, we have people that actually thought with the death, or okay, the Epstein being, I keep saying
no
death, but everyone is saying he's no longer here, right?
Yes.
Everyone thought that when he left, that they left the public eye, they left the mindset of people thinking, there's more to this. But now we have to deal with the fact that Maxwell, everybody knows that this woman, listen, women are smart. You keep records, you have videos, you have pictures, you have so on and so forth. So now everybody's running scared. But the outcry that's going to happen is that when you're looking at the presidency, when you're looking at the politics, when you're looking at the royal family, when you're looking at the intertwining of all of this power, they have to be dealt with. That's the bottom line.
And I agree. And you know, the fact that there's money involved and wealth, if you take that out of this conversation, you're looking at a pretty mediocre pimp, Epstein, and a really, really smart alleged associate who we are quite clearly believing is a sex trafficker, but understand that allegation has not been made in a formal way. You know, if you take all that away, they're just your average pimps. But people are scared, and they're scared of losing their money. They're scared of losing their status. They're scared of being exposed. Meanwhile, survivors are doing everything they can in this case to assert justice. And you're right that other survivors, other people who've been through trauma as they have, are watching. And so it's not just about them. Snezana, my question for you is, as someone who is a survivor, who has experienced these injustices, how do you think that justice for these survivors impacts you? How is it important for you and other survivors who are watching this case?
This is, excuse my language, pissing me off, because she is a sex trafficker and no one is accusing her of that. Even you have evidence, you have everything you need to lock that woman away. Not just her, all of the women should be arrested, as long as you ask me. And survivors, I know how hard it is to speak up, to just trust anybody else, that they are not wearing a mask, that they are not trying to impact your life in a bad way. Because every time you see a victim, you see her as a victim. You don't see her as a person who has life, who has a boyfriend maybe, who has a child. Just act that she is a victim. As I already said when I was with you in London, don't treat the victim just based on their victim story. And I think that they should open up as much as they can and speak up as much as they feel comfortable to speak up. I know how hard that is, but they have to speak everything that can influence in at least tiniest way, so that people who should like be in jail rot in it.
Well, and I think it's important to understand that, you know, for people who are listening, that survivors are not their story. As you're saying, Snezana, it's what's happened to someone, but it's not who they are. Many of these young women in this case have not only advocated, but they've gone on to lead lives that will forever be altered by what Epstein and Maxwell did. In fact, one young woman, and I hate to admit I don't remember her name at the moment, but she actually killed herself. She had a child, that the trauma was too much. Others have talked about, you know, long-term shame and harm that's been caused to them, and then meanwhile they continue to stand up for justice. And I think that's what's really important is, you know, is the American legal system also going to run and hide? Or are we going to ask the hard questions? Are we going to hold this woman accountable? Yes, she is a key to a lot of information, but she's a lot more than that. And yes, Tonya.
Yeah, you know, unfortunately, I don't think our country, or specifically to the United States, we haven't done a good job of addressing demand. We you know, as I was saying earlier about, you know, when you have the apex of power and money, there's no perceived consequences. Why? Because the buyers are those individuals and these tiers of power that have created these sex slaves and what this Epstein case is. They have no perceived consequences. So our country could respond by dealing with a demand. The demand is those folks that are doing the buying. The demand is understanding as a country the violence that is also contributed to within the realm of what's happening to these victims. We don't talk about demand. We don't talk about the violence. We don't talk about the fact that there's a proliferation of the sex industry and how it's become normalized in our country. We don't talk about the fact that women are dehumanized. All of those things have to be dealt with. This case touches on almost every aspect of trafficking, of dehumanization of women, of the power and authority. It talks about the systemic abuse when it comes to power, control, and money. And we could truly begin the obliteration of a large portion of demand by making all of this open to the public. Because the view the public has, as we know, is primarily, you know, on movies. It's, you know, looking at movies and the sensationalism of trafficking.
Right.
This is going to bring it to light at a whole different level.
When people, you know, are looking at this case because of the money, because of the power, because of the names, but you and I both know that the survivors we've worked with it's dirty and it's hard and it's horrible, and it's not just once or twice. These young women and boys are forced into sex acts 5 to 10 times a day. There's big money. There was an Urban Institute study, I believe in 2011, that the average pimp in DC has 2 victims and makes $11,000 a week untaxed. Now that's just your monkey running around, you know, being an idiot on K Street. When you get to Epstein, though, we're talking big deal. But that money doesn't take away the fact that there was extreme trauma. And what I try to explain to people who don't understand the demand, Tonya, is that it's like every time a guy buys a girl who's in a trafficking situation, he's actually stealing a piece of her identity. And
Absolutely.
surviving means bringing yourself back to you. Snezana, as we get ready to close the conversation, I wanted to ask you, what are some things that have supported you in your healing journey that you want to share for other survivors who might be listening, not just survivors of Epstein's case, but girls who are, you know, sitting in that hotel room right now trying to figure out how they're going to get past this? What would you say worked for you that could work for them?
I even now have had traumas, like big traumas. I wake up crying in my bed. I can't sleep at night. But I found music, I found books, and that's what I do. That's what calms me down. If I'm nervous, I run over to my bed and just take a book and force myself to read it so I can go as far away as I can go from that trauma. And I found a person who I can talk to. I have a person in my life who I can really talk to, and it was hard. It was really hard for me to open to that person, and I wounded that person much more than I knew at that point because I couldn't trust. But I don't know, find some hobbies, find some sparks of joy in your life. Fall in love in the sky, fall in love in the bird's sound. I don't know, just try to do something with your life that will level you up.
I think you're talking about mindfulness.
Like what? I didn't hear you.
So Snezana, I think you just actually became a Buddhist here on this call and started talking about mindfulness, like noticing the little things in life.
That helped me. I was relaxing at the river and just watching the sky. That helped me just to calm myself.
Taking walks, finding purpose.
About something better in your future.
Yes.
And live without a mask. I think that's the most important. Live without a mask. If you want to scream, scream. If you want to yell, yell, but yell with respect. Be respectful for others, but be respectful for yourself also.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And just
hiding their masks a lot, behind their traumas, behind their masks, behind their safe walls. And that's the first mistake that you do. You as a survivor have to be truthful to yourself first. All right, I do have bad things in my life. I was, I don't know, sold, or I was molested, or, and all right, that's the part I cannot change. What can I change in my life? What can I do now to make my life better? If they didn't break me, if they didn't break my spirit and who I am, why would I let myself down? I have only myself. It's just me, myself, and I had to succeed.
And you have. And, you know, as I let the viewers know early on, I've known you for a very long time. And one of the very first things you ever said to me is you wanted me to get you a copy of The Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, Part 2. You'd already read Part 1. And and I remember thinking, who's that girl? I'm going to figure out what's going on. And you've always just inspired me, and I've learned so much from you, Snezana. And you know, as survivors, as women, as advocates in this field, you know, finding ways to support ourselves while looking toward the bigger picture. And what's really disturbed me with how this element of the Epstein case has been handled with Ghislaine Maxwell is that getting justice is something that is a part of that healing process, and she knows that. And she's sitting there on that. She's sitting on those keys and has been hiding again in New Hampshire this whole time and denying brave women survivors justice. But I know we have to close now so that people will actually hear us till the end. But I wanted to thank you both so much for joining. This has been an incredible conversation, and I hope that we can continue to stand with survivors, for survivors. Here at Corona Rising, we are a survivor-led team, and we believe in really supporting survivors in every way, from our artisan products to the advocacy to everything from our show to our blogs. I wanted to close with a special pitch for one young survivor named Tiffany Simpson. Tiffany won't be able to listen to this because as a victim of child sex trafficking, the justice system here arrested her and charged her with 20 years in prison. And then that's where she sits. We are advocating for her freedom and starting a petition soon. If you're listening, please make a free Tiffany Simpson sign and send it to us either on Instagram or email me at andrea@coronarising.com. But the more of those signs, the better, because when we deliver them to the governor of Georgia, we want to make sure that he notices the box. So thank you again so very much, both of you, for joining. This is Andrea Powell with Corona Rising. Surviving Now, episode 10 is Ghislaine Maxwell, sex trafficker, and we're signing off. Bye.